Survivors, Chapter 7. The city is a start over. Power plant 1 and Central Quonset A were completed. A was 200 feet long and its semicircle arc of the side and roof went up 18 feet. Another building, Central Quonset B, followed the next day. It housed Pete, the combinatic electronic brain and radio transmitter, receiver and remote controls device, etc. B was of the same measurements as A, as they ran the electronical system underground through a covered ditch and conduit piping. This not only protected the power lines from the elements of the weather, but the people also, for these were passageways from one building to another. Off to the side of B, near A side, a storehouse was built to hold the power distribution transformers, radio control center, and tools. In A was the emergency medical and Mary's quarters, administration with Dirk and Ingalls, and the laboratory with Tina, Andrea, and baby Kay. Tina, Andrea, and baby Kay stayed with Pete and his devices, while Schneider and John, Sonia, and Fred Hawks occupied quarters in the electronics area. The kitchen was a laboratory. The New Earth settlement, as they had dubbed it, had just developed to this point when the glittered speck came over the horizon. "What do you make of it?" Pete asked. Ingalls shook his head. "A flybird, but I didn't recognize the design." Schneider smiled. "That, gentleman," he said softly, "is a Russian flybird, but where in the hell is it from?" "Shall I train the gun on it?" Dirk asked. Ingalls shook his head. "No, but keep your sidearm handy and until we can find out what gives." The bird came to rest nearby. The man stepped out of it with military stiffness. Slowly we walked towards the group. He turned them over. He looked them over. Noting the sidearm, he gave a curt bow and handed his pistol to Ingalls. "But first," he said, "the war is over, and I guess you Americans have won." Ingalls shook his head and returned the pistol. "The war is over," Ingalls said, "and nobody won." The Russian nodded, and then he noticed Schneider. He said something in Russian, an exclamation probably, and held out his hand. The two men shook hands warmly as old friends. "I thought the rocket crashed." "It did," replied the Russian. "Major Dononsky, his wife, and myself alone managed to escape. There was an order to abandon ship. We climbed in craft in an automatic altitude control ejection device sent us out of the ship. I fear our comrades were not so fortunate." "And how have you fared?" "Lousy," answered Ingalls. Briefly he recounted the events. "But you have done well here. I'm afraid we haven't much to offer you, except the skyboat. But even that is extremely low on fuel." We hopped to India and then to Africa. In Johannesburg, we found enough fuel to refill completely. We managed to intercept a radio message that some party was going to South America, so we flew over. Refueling at Sao Paulo. Since then, we have been searching over this continent for you. I'm afraid my friends are very sick, and I do not feel so well myself. Radiation, you know. Ingalls nodded, turned to Mary. Break out some more serum. Tina, you better make some more if you can. I'll try, but we're low on zinc. Maybe we can find some in Sao Paulo. Out of wreckage and ruin, New Earth was built. A town housing 2 former deadly enemies in friendship. 2 weeks after their arrival, they had constructed 4 buildings. Building number 4 was Central Quonset C, built next to B, just beyond the little power radio distribution hut. It had the same dimensions as A and B. It was a master supply and storage warehouse. The Russians lived in it. Pete was probing South America for signs of his remote-controlled miniature flybird television. Days were passing now, and work was being accomplished. At the end of the 3 weeks, 3 living quarter Quonsets had been completed. Major and Minister Lansky occupied one, Schneider and Joan the second, and on Sunday, Ingalls married Pete, and Andrea, with baby Kay, they occupied the third hut. We've established a sort of civilization here on Earth, and we've got the living quarters and Central Quonsets A and B and C. The radio, television, remote control tower, and life has settled down, and Ingalls looked at her. If you're going to say something, say it. You're the one that's supposed to say it, Tina exploded. Huh? Ingalls' mind could not quite grasp the situation. After all, he was a spaceman, not a lover. Andrea and oh. The look in Tina's eyes was something to see. She could barely contain herself. Ingalls nodded. I'll talk to Dirk, and he can take command for 15 minutes for the wedding ceremony, but you never even asked me to marry you yet. How do you know I'll marry you? Well, who said I was marrying you? What? Tina exploded. The grin on Ingalls' face was as big as a quarter-faced moon. Suddenly, he broke into laughter. Then Tina came to him, embraced him. Damn you, she muttered. You scared me half to death. Ingalls laughed again. I got quite a shock too, young lady. Besides, with Dirk and Mary getting married, I really don't have much of the choice, do I? Tina pulled away for a second. Well, if that's the way you feel. Ingalls whirled her back to his chest. You know damn well how I feel, he said, trying but failing to maintain a military composure. Then Tina squirmed and dropped lower hand from his back. Do I? She sighed. Ingalls looked down at her. Easy, girl, let's wait till we're married. Tina was laughing at this when Mary burst into the room. Tina, Commander, give me a hand. It's Mrs. Stanoski. She's taking a turn for the worse. Mary rushed past them into the medical section of A. Minutes later, Mary joined them in the Donoski's Quonset. What is it? Ingalls asked. Radiation, Mary shot back. She was almost finished with her series, and we ran into something we didn't figure on. They didn't have the protective clothing. I've already injected the Major and General Boris, what's his name, but if she gets sterile on us, you can kiss off the future generations. The brain came out with a cross-genetic pattern. As it is, we have the barest minimum. We lose her, and we end up with hereditary blocks. too far gone for surgery or x-ray, but if we can build her up to an overproduction of F shells. Mary did not finish. She worked furiously with Tina. 3 injections, one right after the other, oxygen steadily, and Dirk and Ingalls each gave a pint of blood. As Mary worked, attaching various diodes to the woman's body, she said, "We're damn lucky she's a universal receiver. Well, we'll know in 3 or 4 hours. Let's carry her over to my section." He was tired and he was worried. He noticed General Boris and Major Donofsky waiting on the other side of the room. He walked over to them. "How is she?" Boris asked. "As well as can be expected. It'll be a tough flight." Almost 25% of the eggshells have been infected, and that's a delicate area. "Then you cannot save her?" Donofsky said, saddened. "We might, with anti-radiation serum." Boris looked puzzled. "What is this serum?" "We did not have it in Russia." "Didn't you have any protection against radiation?" "In space, the hull of our ship and the spacesuits. On Earth..." He left the sentence unfinished. "I see. Well, this so-called anti-radiation serum is something brand new. It's not actually a serum, as you usually think, but chemical compounds which react within certain cells. When those cells come under a radiation dosage, it helps with cancer, in some cases too. Essentially, when the body is attacked by alpha or beta or gamma particles or rays, these chemicals are activated. They work to replace the destroyed cells. The destroyed cells are given off as body waste. In your wife's case, we've given her an extra dosage to build new strong egg cells. I imagine for the next 10 or 20 days, she'll have menstrual periods like never before. But once over the hill, it's all downhill, fighting. In time, I suppose man will develop built-in anti-radiation toxins, but for the next several generations, man will have to take this series of shots every 2 years. But surely all this radiation will go away. Ingalls shook his head. "No, General Boris, it will not go away. If we could get rid of this strontium-90 and cesium-137, radioactive fallout would be 100 times less dangerous." "I'm not familiar with these radiations," Donofsky said. "What are they?" Dirk heard the question as he joined them. "Strontium-90 is a radioactive isotope. Direct exposure, if unchecked, leads to severe burns, leukemia, and genetic mutations or sterility. Strontium-90 has a half-life of about 25 years. Cesium-137 about 33 years. That means that 1/2 of the original mass will decay into a non-radioactive element, namely lead. However, say we have a couple of tons of this strontium-90. In 25 years, we'll only have a couple of tons of this radiation. But having that in the next 25 years, we'll have 1,000 pounds, half a ton, giving off radiation. It's half-life, and that's why it takes so long. It'll probably cause 1,000 years to clear the Earth of all the radiation." So, General Boris, calcium, continued Ingalls, is an important part of the bone structure. Strontium-90 tends to get absorbed in the bone growth. It remains in the body, well, almost indefinitely. However, with the anti-radiation treated calcium and phosphorus and other chemicals, there is a battle waged. Mary came out of the medical section. She was smiling and joined the group. "What is leukemia?" Major Donofsky asked. Mary smiled. "Cancer of the blood, right, Mary?" Ingalls replied, "Not exactly, Commander. Cancer is a malignant tumor and leukemia resembles it. The blood-producing organisms are affected. These are too many mature and immature white cells. White cells are necessary for tissue repair, such as a cut finger. But when you get too many of them, they squeeze out the red cells, which deliver fresh oxygen of the cells and carry off waste matter. The anti-radiation serum for this disease works on the blood and the producing organs, destroying the white cells until a proper level is reached. Approximately, in addition, blood transfusion help. Radiation is not only cause of leukemia, but it can cause it. Is not only cause, but it can cause it, especially in excessive amount like we have now." Ingalls nodded. "In addition, this series of shots also fights to protect the brain cells, the most critical region of all. We have to protect against general dehydration and decay of tissues. Enough radiation can destroy enough brain cells to cause various forms of insanity even." General Boris nodded. "I had a healthy respect of radiation. Now it frightens me. Well, we're safe for the moment. How is she? Mary?" "In utter misery. She's going through her first menstrual. I think she'll pull through it. It's a good sign anyway. I'll give her a small booster in a couple of hours, but I want to figure out the dosage on Pete." "Okay, I guess he's over there. If not, use the radio phone. Otherwise, you might get an intimate personal embarrassment." Mary laughed. "He's going to wear poor Andrea out." Ingalls laughed this time. "Men wear out before girls do," he shot back. "Ha!" she exclaimed, closing the door. Suddenly the door burst open again. It was Pete, followed by Mary. He looked worried. "I think you better come, Commander, and bring your pistol with you." "What is it, Pete?" The radio picked up a bleep. The brain resolved it. "It's the Lunar One bleeping. It's Flybird. The brain deducted that due to its erratical course, the pilot must be ill or injured in view of this fact, probably radiation sickness." "Bad? Is it bad?" "Brain thinks it's affected the pilot's brain. He's gone off the deep end." "Oh, murder. Where is it?" 20 miles southeast and headed for us." "Where's Schneider?" "He's watching it on radar. I got the miniature ready to fly after it." "Okay, Dirk, go get the Russian Flybird." He turned to the rest of them. "We mounted the heavy blaster on it," he explained. Ingalls and Pete entered the radio brain control section first, followed by Mary, Tina, Boris, and Donowski. Andrea, Snyder, and Joan were at the answer board. Snyder looked at Ingalls. "I got the camera on its way. We'll have a TV in a moment. The Flybird is losing altitude. I hope it lands." Ingalls nodded. "You know, if it doesn't, he tries to land too close to camp, I'll have to blast him. Can't risk a Flybird explosion in the settlement." "I know. I suppose there's really nothing we can do to save them now. Killing them would be merciful rather than letting them die of radiation poisoning." "Yes," Ingalls replied. The television tube came to life. The picture was one of Flybird landing. Pete made an adjustment and the zoomer lens moved into a telephoto shot. Ingalls could see 3 men climb out of the craft. Suddenly, Schneider pointed towards the screen. "Look, she's still smoking." Ingalls shook his head. "Too much compression and that thing'll blow sky high." Suddenly, the screen turned to a reddish-white blank, and when the picture returned to discernible figures, only a few charred pieces of metal and a wisp of smoke and a patch of blackened ground marked the remains of the Flybird. Well, Ingalls said, that's that. Not quite. Not quite, returned Pete, opening the lens. He said, adjusting a dial. There, on the plains, were the three men, walking as if nothing had happened. Pete zoomed the lens in on the three men. Two carried pistols, a blaster, and an ion charger gun. The third had a rifle, the bullet-firing kind. I don't want them to get close to the settlement with those blasters, Ingalls said. Schneider nodded, but they headed our way. Then I guess, Ingalls said very slowly, we'll have to cut them off and disarm them if we can. The plains 5 miles southeast on the newer settlement were a sagebrush desert. Across it, three men staggered. Half a mile in from of them, of the Russian flybird landed. Dirk remained at the controls, ready to use the heavy blaster if necessary. Ingalls, Schneider, Boris, and Dononsky moved out, but to the right of the bird, keeping out of the lane of fire. They spread out, 5 feet apart, and moved in a single line against the three. In the middle of the barren wilderness, they met. I'm Commander Ingalls, he said, commander of the newer settlement. Hey, you mean there are people still alive? Yes. They look like Ruskies to me, the second indicating the two Russians. They are, Ingalls said. The war's over. Who won? Asked the second guy. No one. Huh? No one. Everyone lost. There are no more nations, no more Americans, no more British, no more Frenchmen, Japanese, Chinese, no Russians, nobody. Well then, what is there? Just earthlings. The third one moaned and ran his hand through his falling hair. A large clump of hair came out. He's going bald, the first one said. Yes, he is, Ingalls agreed. You all will. You have radiation sickness. And you're going to cure us? We'll try. Where do we go? Encampment, just a few miles away over the hills. Well, let's go. Oh, yes. First, give me your guns. We have a lot of atomic pile and stuff around camp, so we don't carry arms in camp. Like hell, with those damn Ruskies, I won't turn my back on them. The war's over, Ingalls said. There are no more Russians, no more Americans, just Earthmen. I still ain't turning my gun over to you, the first one went on. Suddenly he staggered and fell on his face. The third man dropped the rifle and ran to him. The second man slowly lifted his gun and aimed it at Boris Schneider. Schneider fired first. The man disappeared in a flash and a puff of smoke. The third man looked at the smoke and then back at his fallen comrade as Ingalls stepped forward. The man on the ground rose, pistol in hand. Ingalls kicked it out of his grip and the man flopped back on his ground. Let's go, Ingalls said. No, I'm not going to let you take me, the man said with the rifle cried. The man with the rifle cried. Ingalls jumped him before he could point the rifle, which he had picked up off the ground. They struggled for a tense half-minute. The rifle fired once. The bullet flew off to the side. Ingalls gripped the stock. The third man suddenly lost his grip. The butt flew up and clipped him on the chin, and he collapsed. It's Major Dononsky. He's been hit. Ingalls looked down at the fallen man. Dirk, he shouted, bring the bird. Ingalls paced the floor. Mary came from the medical section. Well, what is it? The two radiation cases are dead. I couldn't save Dononsky. She walked across the laboratory out the door to where Dirk was waiting for her. Ingalls entered the medical section. Tina was with Mrs. Dononsky. I'm sorry, Mrs. Dononsky, she was saying. Mrs. Dononsky patted her hand. She had shed a few tears. Thank you for telling me, she said. She stiffened and turned to Commander Ingalls. Mary tells me I will get well and be able to have normal babies. Yes, you can perform the marriage. I know my duty, Commander, and I shall do it. The General and I will get married as soon as possible. Yes, ma'am. Tina started to speak, but Ingalls shook his head, silencing her. They left the room together, and outside in the laboratory, Tina said, "She should have a choice." Ingalls smiled. He put his arm around her shoulder as they strolled across the laboratory. I suppose each ideal of national ideals has its own faults and its own usefulness. It is her nature, and I will not interfere in it. In the past, it would have been contrary to our nature, but it fits in this situation. He laughed to himself. Man has been disagreeing over points like these ever since the world began, and over points like these, they just about destroyed it. Let's go have some coffee. Outside at the Central Quonset area, Pete, Andrea, and Baby Kay, Schneider and Joan, Dirk and Mary, and General Borlas were watching something off in the distance. Ingalls and Tina joined them. "What is it?" Ingalls asked. "Can't make it out, but it looks like automobiles," Pete said. "Yeah, but from what museum did those rattletraps spring? At least 30 or 40 years old." Over the hill came 2 old cars. Each was pulling a wagon. Both of these station wagons were loaded with people. Men, women, and a few children. One of the wagons also had people in it. They seemed to be shouting and cheering. The second wagon was loaded with various items, boxes of food, furniture, and clothing. "Well," Dirk spoke up, "looks like we'll have busy building more housing." "Yes," said Ingalls, waving to the approaching group. "It sure does." There are still more survivors on Earth. The old planet's coming back to life. General Boris nodded his head. "Yes," he said, "we know. They are all from Earth. And this is only the beginning."